Okay, credit policy. What is credit policy? Exactly. So these will be for self-pay. Increasingly, this is for people with high deductible plans, health savings accounts, where they may need financing of their healthcare expenses. So credit policy, healthcare organizations, particularly large ones, will have very comprehensive credit policies. Over what period of time will we allow you to pay back a bill? To whom are we going to grant credit? What kind of standards are we going to apply? How aggressive are we going to be in collecting? And what kind of discounts we're going to give to particular groups. Okay, so the next component of working capital management is what's called supply chain management, or inventory management, materials management. There are lots of different names for it. There's some of the techniques that are more common are stockless or just-in-time systems, point-of-service distribution systems. Some healthcare organizations have got vending machines on the nursing units where you just put in a card and the machine dispenses the supplies that are necessary. But essentially, what we want to get at here is to minimize the inventory costs. Why? The goal is to meet operational needs at lowest cost. Why? Why does inventory have a cost? Rochelle.
Storage, especially a lot of medical supplies probably need to be maintained at certain temperatures, and which can get pretty expensive.
Right, Gloria.
So it can be billed as part of the other revenue, or other where you can transfer it to have the cost.
Right. So inventory really is no different than cash. It's a non-earning asset. So if you've got a whole bunch of money invested in inventory, it's sitting in a warehouse somewhere, not earning any return on it. So the point here is to minimize inventory costs, but the key phrase here is to meet operational needs. What does that mean? What might be a big problem if in inventory management if operational needs are not met? Like what's the downside of that? Gloria. Yeah. Anybody ever been in an operating room with a surgeon and this particular scalpel's not available? He or she won't be amused by that. So the first time an operating room does not have the supplies they need, the first time an emergency department doesn't have the drugs that it needs, the first time that an ICU doesn't have the technology that it needs, that's a big problem from a patient care perspective, from a quality perspective, from every perspective. So inventory management, you want to minimize the cost of inventory, but you've got to make sure you always have the supplies available because people's lives depend on it. The EOQ model, as I said before, you will never be asked to calculate an EOQ, but most healthcare organizations will use very sophisticated material management, inventory management software. And what we're going to do here is just basically talk about how it works and what basis is it making on what basis is it doing the analyses. So here are the simplistic assumptions of the EOQ model. Essentially what it does is it recognizes that there are two fundamental costs to inventory, carrying costs and ordering costs. What are carrying costs?
Is that similar to the carrying costs of receivables?
Exactly. You've parked a bunch of inventory in a warehouse or in your facility somewhere. It's not earning an asset, so there's an opportunity cost. You're foregoing revenue or interest or whatever on that asset because it's parked, it's invested in inventory. And an ordering cost is you have to employ people to do all the ordering, make sure that your organization always has the supplies it needs. That requires staff, computers, operating systems, and so on. It also requires people to go out and find the supplies and to negotiate with providers and sellers about the prices and the availability of different kinds of supplies. So it's not trivial, these costs, particularly for large academic medical centers. So what this essentially says, that total inventory cost for a particular item is the sum of the total carrying costs and the total ordering costs. And the carrying cost is the percentage of the inventory, the annual carrying cost, like 2% or 5% or whatever the interest rate is, times the purchase price of the unit, divided by the number of units per order divided by 2. And it's divided by 2 because at the beginning of the period you'll have 0, and then at the beginning of the period you'll have, say, 100 vials of IV, and at the end of the period you'll have 0. So 100 plus 0 divided by 2 is the average inventory over that period of time. So then we just do some differential calculus, which I know all of you love, and we get the economic order quantity is the square root of 2Fs over Cp. So it's easier, I think, to understand what this model does by visually. So we've got carrying costs, which is a linear line straight up. Why is it linear?
The more inventory you have, the more costs you get.
Exactly. So the more inventory you have, you're paying 2%, you're foregoing 3% or whatever interest on it. The more you have, the more the carrying cost will be. Why is the ordering cost not non-linear descending?
Because it's like you're buying in bulk, so it's like easier to buy a lot of stuff. You have one person that's dealing with that and
Right. So you're ordering. The more frequently you order, or the less frequently you order, you're essentially having a fixed ordering cost, and you're spreading that over a greater volume of inventory. So your cost per unit of inventory goes down as the order size goes up. So all this software does is it finds the lowest position on the total inventory cost curve, which is essentially the intersection of the ordering cost, the sum. This line here is the sum of this line with this line. And the EOQ is at the shallowest part of the total inventory cost curve. So just to do a quick calculation, we've got a $200 per unit, fixed cost of $1,000, and so on. Then we find that the EOQ for this kind of supply is 500 units. At that level, then, what we can do, what the software will do, is it will tell you what is your inventory cost going to be at that level. So if the organization chooses to order at 500 in quantities of 500, the average inventory cost of that item will be $20,000. That is the lowest possible inventory cost for this item. Any other order volume besides 500, that 20,000 will be higher than the 20,000. Ordering costs will be higher than they need to be, or carrying costs will be higher than they need to be.
Is that annual?
This is the average. You can also calculate the average inventory, as I explained a minute ago. If you start off at 500 and you end up at 0, on average you'll have 250 units in inventory. Number of orders per year is simply the usage divided by the number of times, divided by the EOQ. So if you use 5,000 units of IV a year and you order in batches of 500, you're going to have to order IV 10 times per year. So the point here is that the EOQ gives you the optimal volume at which to reorder supplies. If you do not choose the EOQ, then your inventory costs will be higher than necessary. That's what the point of the software is giving you. Finally, or second to final, accruals. What are accruals? Every organization has them. Right, so they are pots of money. Typically, they're wages and taxes that are owed to governments, where the employee has done the work. So a nurse has worked for 2 weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, you have to pay the nurse his or her wages. So the accruals are what you put aside over that 2-week period so that you have the cash to pay the nurse at the end of the 2-week period. Taxes are paid monthly or biweekly, depending on what kind of a staff member you have. Property taxes, insurance, and so on. These are all pots of money that organizations put aside so that they have the cash and the wherewithal to pay when they come due. They're free in the sense that you've got pots of money there waiting. You can use that money. So while the nurse is working for 2 weeks, free as it were, you can use that money that you're going to be paying him or her in 2 weeks. So it's a free source of financing. But then at the end of the 2 weeks, you have to have the money available to pay the nurse.